I've had people come up to me and talk to me in a Jamaican accent
Is
because
it?
they know that they'll say
Really?
jokes and like, yeah man, or whatever, because
Wow.
they know that my roots are from Jamaica. But it's just like, where's that come from? Like, or they'll try and say, they'll talk about it, or I've had people assuming that because I'm Jamaican I must smoke weed.
Wow.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Listen In podcast. My name's Aravana.
My name is Anya.
And my name's Boomy.
Let's get into it.
So today we just wanted to talk about quite an interesting topic. There is a very well-known author and speaker called Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope I said her surname right. And she's just excellent. She's got so many wonderful books. She wrote Half of a Yellow Sun, and I think probably one of her most famous speeches or writings recently is We Should All Be Feminists, because Beyonce used it in one of her songs. I think a lot of people heard about Chimamanda through that. But quite a long time ago, she did a TED talk called The Danger of a Single Story. And it's quite a powerful TED talk. And the talk is all about that tendency for people to basically have one view of a person or a culture or a place. And she gives lots of different examples. So she gives examples of people in America having a single view of her as a Nigerian and as an African, assuming that she didn't know this, or this was what life was in Nigeria based on the only things that they had seen of Nigeria. And then she also went into her own experience of also having single stories of people. So having just maybe the media view of people from another country, immigrants from another country, or you know, people who worked for her family, having a single view of them and not realizing that actually there's a whole background of their family. They have talents, they have skills, they have all of these things. So we would highly recommend that you listen to this talk, and we will link it in our Instagram or on our Twitter somehow. But yeah, it really did. We really thought that it would be a really good talking point, because it's quite closely linked to something like stereotypes. You know, a stereotype is a type of single story about a person where you just know one thing about that person or that place or that culture or that language, and you just paste that on everyone from that place. So we just wanted to sort of talk about that a bit more, and talk about what we learned from Chimamanda's talk.
It was a very interesting talk, and I really loved the way that she explained things, and she spoke about just some of the assumptions that were made about people from Nigeria and West Africa. And actually, it was interesting because being someone who's Caribbean, growing up here in England, I admit, in terms of the media, what was portrayed was very much a single view. There's always one view that was conveyed. And it was only until I started really forming friendships with people from West Africa, from Nigeria, from Ghana, from lots of different places in West Africa, and learning about the culture a lot more, looking into things myself, seeing pictures of different places, that I realized actually what I had in mind was completely different to what the actual reality is. And I think I think what she touched on as well was that it really is just the media perception. But what I really liked about what she said is how even she had some of those perceptions about other cultures. So she spoke about like the Mexican culture and the Native American culture, and how she had one kind of perception on that culture as well. And it just made me think, wow, we all have these things. But it's so important just to broaden your mind, really learn about the culture yourself, and then form your own perspective. And even when you find your own perspective of it, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. You know, so I think for me it was just really good, because like I said, I admit I did have a single view of West Africa, and I know people have single views of Caribbeans. I've heard people say things which I found offensive, because I'm thinking that's not even true. So, you know, it just shows that we all have these things, really.
I kind of feel like that's one of the things that I really love about her talk, is that it's sort of shining the light on everyone and pointing the finger on everyone. So obviously, because of our history in the world with the past of colonialism and all of this stuff, there are probably more generalizations from the West towards countries that were colonized and things like that. There's a lot of history there, but at the same time, even if you know, and when you are a minority in another country or another place, you're more likely to come across people that have a single view, assumptions about you, stereotypes, etc. But also you yourself as a minority may also have assumptions and stereotypes about other people as well. So it's important to you know, acknowledge that and be open to learning more about others. So, you know, even within because I think sometimes when people talk about these sort of issues of ethnicity and things like that, it's so complicated, and it's so, you know, there's so many different levels and layers, and I think that often the conversation is just this one layer, where there's so many layers within it that, you know, everybody needs to look at their own perceptions of other people, not just necessarily in terms of ethnicity, but even in terms of other things as well. Like and that's why I really like that part of her talk where she talked about, actually, I realized I was guilty of this also in a different way. And with her, it was, you know, more like going back to her home country of Nigeria, it was more to do with someone from a different ethnic group, or different and a different class. She just saw one thing about them, like, this person is my cleaner, so I assume that they're not educated or whatever. That's not what she said, but like, you know, it's kind of assuming that people aren't educated because they come from here, or they wouldn't like this because they're from here. All of those things are just these stereotypes that you might have, that it's important to really reflect on. And I think, I know this is slightly different, but I think that I've listened to it a few times over the years, because she did it a really long time ago. But when I listened to it again recently, it really made me think about it in terms of being a professional and clinically. I think sometimes it's so easy, because you meet your clients, your patients, whatever you call them, in this one place. You just, it's really easy to have this one view of them. Like, this is my patient that has this problem, or whatever it is. But actually, there's so many things, there's so many other things. And sometimes it's hard to, especially if you know, everyone's busy, you have a busy schedule, whatever. But it's really important to try and take the time out to find out more about them, or find out more about where they're coming from, or who they are, so that you can have because otherwise you're not really having a proper interaction with the person. You're just seeing this one pain, and the pain is difficulty, trouble, something that needs to be fixed, or whatever you call it. There's a lot of controversy in the sort of words that I'm using anyway, depending on what you're talking about. But let's just use a medical model to talk about what we're talking about now, or my example that I'm giving. So I think that it is really applicable to so many parts of life and work and relationships. But I just think that the key thing is being able to see the impact of what having a stereotype or a single story can have on someone else, and being aware of it so that you can learn and you can get to know other people as well.
And I think, like you said, Rabna and Anya, you both said it, that actually she didn't just spotlight other people like, oh, you're the problem. Kind of like making sure that everybody takes time to actually reflect on what they do and what they think of other people. So all these assumptions and stereotypes and all of that. And I think I've shared with you both one that I did recently at work, in terms of I had someone with me one day. I'm not going to give any more information than that, but I had someone with me at work one day.
Oh yeah.
I took in a particular food. It's yam porridge at work, and because I work in an area where is not even closely as diverse as London, I had my own sort of assumptions about this person, that there's no way they'll know what that is. In the first place, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, they're going to want to ask me about what's that and what's in it and all of these other exciting questions you do get sometimes when you take a different type of food to work, which is usually well meant. Maybe sometimes not, but usually well meant. Anyway, I was like, oh, what have you got? I was like, oh, it's yam porridge. I was like, oh, I know yam and I know plantain. I was like, wow. So I felt really bad after that. And previously I used to think, oh, I've kind of like usually set myself off stereotypes. I tried to have an open mind, but that definitely challenged me that, look, it's an ongoing work. It's not something that you don't get there. You have to keep challenging these thoughts when they come. Think about why you think that way. And also like just kind of like thinking of, okay, what am I going to do to address this situation, so I don't always think about this person or this group of people that way. So yeah.
And where did you get your information from? Because
too.
a lot of times, sometimes people have only got their information from maybe, like Anya was saying, the media or a book or something, when that's not necessarily accurate. So it's important to actually just hang out with people, have conversations with them, get to know them, get to know things about their culture. And also they're not the end all and be all about their culture, because they don't know everything.
Exactly.
Like they know their view of their culture and their whatever, so that's
a very important point, Arabna, in terms of they're not the be all and end all of that culture.
Yeah. And actually, when we think about culture, there's so many differences within culture. So it's like, even within Nigerian culture, there are differences.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And things are different. And actually, I think that's important to bear in mind. Same with the Caribbean. You can look at the Caribbean and say, oh, they're Caribbean, it's all the same. But actually, there's differences between cultures from the islands themselves. So, and the different culture in terms of food and ways of doing things. So there's so much. And I think it's really important to really get to know the individual. And I think just kind of what you guys touched on as well, when it comes to our actual work, and we're meeting people from different cultures, it's so easy to say, oh, they're from here, so they might not want to do this. They might not want to follow this recommendation because they are from this part of the world. But actually, how do you know? That's why they might be resistant to taking forward recommendations. Having a conversation, getting to know the actual patient, getting to know, what brought them to this point, getting to know what they need in terms of support, is going to be a lot more beneficial than just assuming. So yeah, I think that's something as well to really think about. And I think it's a shame because at uni, I don't think we really touched on these things. And I think it's so important to think about these things. Of course, we talk about, the fact of it's important to consider different cultures within our practice. But I think the actual conversation about, even within the culture, there are differences. And actually, that's why it's so important to actually get to know the individual. Because the work we do anyway, we very much are working with individuals. Every child presents differently. Every family is different.
Yes.
So every therapist is different. We're all very different. So actually the way in which we work should reflect that as well. We should be looking to adapt to the clients and where they are at, not necessarily us expecting them to adapt to us.
Yeah, when I was younger, I started reacting to shower gels. Like I was fine with them, and then I just started reacting to them and getting these rashes. So nothing would work. Like none of the soaps was working. I just kept on getting like rashes, eczema, or whatever. And then my mum was like, "Do you know what? We'll just use soap from Ghana, like black soap, whatever you want to call it. It's got its own name, but I think a lot of people here refer to it as African black soap." So I started using it, and within like a week or two, it just went away. And I had seen the dermatologist, and when the skin thing was bad, and they like recommended whatever it was that they recommended. And then I went back soon after I started using the sort of the black soap, and it was going away. And she was asking me like what I was doing and stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I started using this soap from Ghana." And she was like, "Oh, what's in it?" And I was like, "Oh, you know, like I can't remember exactly how they make it, but I think they use like plantain skins or something like that, ashes from it or something. I can't remember exactly, but I knew at that time." And she was like, "No, you need to stop using that." And I read some research about these skin, she had read some research about this particular skin thing, the banana skins or whatever, and how it's bad for you and stuff like that. So obviously I didn't listen to her. I just kept using it because at the end of the day, I used my black soap, my skin was fine. But it's that whole thing of not even considering what I was saying. There's so many levels to it. Like there's the level of you're the expert and I'm the patient. But also I think sometimes the fact that it's something from somewhere else, it's like, oh no, like it definitely isn't good. Like they haven't. But then you have your own personal experience of actually, this is the only thing that's worked.
Exactly.
So I think that it's really important, like we talk about these things, assumptions and stereotypes and stuff like that from a minority's point of view, but there's also the element of you as a professional also looking at that in terms of how you interact with your clients for a range of different reasons, and just assuming that what you're saying is always right. Because you have this story of them being this person or this thing, or not really looking into other things. And I'm not saying like do things that are not evidence-based and all, no, I'm just saying that I'm just using that as an example of sometimes there's just this reluctance to see beyond what you know, to even look beyond what you know, because these are the facts that we know and we accept. And it's like, actually, in the same way that you shouldn't really have a stereotype about people, you should kind of look into other people and stuff. Just kind of listen to people as well in your position of a professional, and don't assume that you're this person that knows everything and can fix everything and whatever else. I know I've gone sort of left from the topic, but I feel like it really made me think about that in another way. When I listened to it for the 100th time or whatever it is that I've listened to it. So it was really interesting in that way.
It still links really well into it, because you're sharing from that perspective, that angle, if that makes sense. And I think it's important to consider all the different angles. I remember at a meeting recently, it was just actually we had supervision, and I remember one of my colleagues said, she was just sharing her experience of talking to, so everyone but obviously that bring like a case and just talking about what you've tried, and then seeking advice on what you can do differently, just for people who are probably not who don't work in as allied health professionals. I may not necessarily know what I mean by supervision in this context. So this was the basis for the conversation, and everyone had shared about what they were finding challenging, especially with probably like you giving advice based on the evidence, and then parents not necessarily taking it on board for various reasons. Some parents are just like, well, I don't trust that advice you're giving me. Some, like, they know their home circumstances, they know their child's needs. There are lots of other factors, isn't it? Whereas we do have the evidence base, but does it consider all of these other factors in the midst of all of that? Does that make sense? So yes, this works, but as it considered things in terms of like different cultures, for example, or like different home situations. So there's all of that. And then my colleague was like, one day she was talking to a parent and telling them to try this thing at home. And then the parent was like, do you have children? She was like, and she was taken aback by the question, but she was like, no. And then she was like, oh yeah, I can tell you don't. It's the fact that, yes, that's the fact that we do give all this advice, and you should try this, it might work, and all of that. And we do, I think sometimes as professionals, we are great and try to find solutions and work around the family. But in comparison, these parents and these children, they are living the everyday of what, if that makes sense. So like, wow, it just makes you really think, like, well, I can't really relate then. But also, if you think about it from the flip side, this parent also then assuming that because you don't have children, then you can't relate. The danger of a single stories, and it's that kind of stereotype, because, well, she's worked with different children and they don't all present the same, even if they have the same diagnosis. So yeah, anyway, it's just interesting. We all do it.
It is.
Yeah, it is. I've had someone say the same thing to me about, do you have kids? I remember being earlier on in my career, and they said, do you have kids? And I was like, no, I don't. But yeah, no, I definitely get that. And I do think that sometimes, people who have children, there might be a different level that they can relate to parents on. But again, at the same time, making that assumption that just because they have kids, they can then relate, is an issue in itself. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. And yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think it's good to think about, in terms of professionally, how we really do respond to some of these families. And sometimes the reason why parents might not want to take on the recommendations has nothing to do with culture itself. It might just be to do with their own personal preferences or their own personal experiences, And I think it's just important to get to know these things, and want to learn. And actually, if you've tried, I mean, this is something that's challenging me at the moment. If I've tried to recommend something time and time again, and, for whatever reason, the parents still aren't taking it on board, is that the right recommendation to make? Or actually, if it's not life and death, is it the right recommendation to make? Or is there something else that we could look at that could be more beneficial? So I think it's good to think about those things as well.
Yeah. And, like you were saying, just want to try, because sometimes people have one view about a certain person, like they've heard they're like this, they've heard they're difficult, they heard this, they heard that, but actually sometimes that's not even correct. Like sometimes people have made assumptions about them or whatever and then passed it on to you, but actually when you interact with that person and you are open to them, you find out that actually that wasn't accurate in the first place. So I do think that sort of desire to want to know more about other people is important. I think that sometimes people just, like you said, I think you've said before, Anya, sometimes people just don't know stuff. Like, I've never lived in Russia. Do you know what I mean? I don't know much about the Russian culture. When I meet somebody from Russia, I can find out more about it from them. I can read about it, etc. But I think it's more sort of me thinking, oh, they're from Russia, so that means this stereotype, and just insisting on that. It's different because if you don't know, you don't know. That's okay. Especially depending on what your life has been like and what exposure you've had to certain things. But the problem is when you hold on to that stereotype and you don't want to you don't even want to try and learn about that person. You don't want to be open to that. just little, little things like that,
Mm.
that, I mean, they seem little, but it's actually a big thing to just be open and just try and get to know people and get to learn and acknowledge that you don't know.
Yeah.
Instead of, oh, you're from here, I know this about you people or these things, and that is that. Like, I know nobody says this, but that's the sort of
Yeah,
underlying speech behind our assumptions, isn't it? To me, anyway.
Yeah, it is.
Do you know, this might be a bit random, but just when you're talking around, I just thought about the fact that, you know how you might introduce yourself to someone and say, like for me, for example, oh, my name's Bumi, I'm from Nigeria. And the person you're communicating with, the first thing, obviously, because they want to show you that they know a bit about your culture, is they just offload and download all of this stuff that they think they know about your culture to you, like, oh, I've heard this about Nigeria, or even sometimes one of the ones I find a bit weird, you tell someone you're from Nigeria, is that, oh, I've been to Africa before, and you're like, yikes, it's a huge continent. But like when you're saying that, it just made me think about the fact that sometimes, yes, people do mean well. They want to tell you they can relate with you, or they know something about where you come from, and that's great. But again, even that, a lot of that can be a bit presumptuous or inaccurate.
So there's a guy who I came across. I went to his event, actually. It's called 56 Black Men, and it's by a man called set up by a man called Cephas Williams. And so what he actually did was he had taken loads of photos of Black men in hoodies. And this event was some of these Black men coming forth and actually talking about what they do, sharing about, their life. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And I think what I really liked, it had people like David Lammy in a hoodie. And actually, I think it's so interesting because so often society places Black men in a hoodie as being something negative.
Something dangerous and
something dangerous, something negative. And actually, by putting people like David Lammy into a hoodie and other Black men into a hoodie, it just makes you see that they're just Black men who are wearing hoodies. It doesn't mean that they are all of these negative connotations that you have about them. And so this event was really good because we saw people who were like really articulate and fantastic poets come forward and do poems. We had people talking about businesses that they'd set up, really successful businesses. We had people talking about a range of things that they had done really positively in their own lives and also in the community as well. And this is not shown enough. This is not shown enough. And I just really liked the concept. I thought it was really fantastic. And I just thought this is amazing what he's doing. And actually it just shows that he's also trying to change that narrative for people. And I thought it was great. So I've got some friends who, when I was living outside of London, we would just talk when we'd meet up. And they were like an older kind of Caucasian couple. And one of them, she would always say to me, because she knew I was from London, she'd always talk about the time that she spent when she was in London, when she lived in London. And she would always come up to me and say, oh, I spoke to my friend the other day who's from Congo. And she'll just tell me about what they spoke about. And it could just be just general stuff. But I thought, that's great. But I thought, I'm not from Congo. And I don't really know much about the Congolese culture either. So, but then every time I'd see her, she'll talk to me about Congo or somewhere else in Africa. And I felt like that's fantastic, but that I can't really relate to this in the way that you think I can, because I'm really not from, well, let's not get into it too much. Obviously, people in the Caribbean are from Africa, don't get me wrong. But as in, like, growing up, I have not had much association with that culture. So for me, it was like, that's fantastic. But I don't know what you want me to say to this, because I don't really know. I don't know. But then on the other side, I've had people come up to me and talk to me in a Jamaican accent,
Is
because
it?
they know that they'll
Really?
say jokes and like, yeah man, or whatever, because
Wow.
they know that that my roots are from Jamaica. But it's just like, where's that come from? Like, or they'll try and say, they'll talk about it, or I've had people assuming that because I'm Jamaican I must smoke weed.
Wow.
Which is offensive. I'm not gonna lie, I get so offended by it, because I'm just like, where has this even come from? Like, how can you generalize a whole a whole nation?
Wow.
It really upsets me. So I get that. I get just loads of things about being Jamaican that people have stereotypes on. I've had people even say to me, oh, you know, my parents wouldn't approve of you because you're Caribbean, or my parents don't really, you know, they don't really like you because you're Jamaican, or, you know, they always say Jamaican people are like this. I've had a lot of it, and I just feel like,
crazy.
What is this? You know, it's like you're not even trying to get to know me as the individual.
Yeah.
You're just placing stereotypes on me from the beginning because of where my roots are from, where I'm from.
Yeah, gosh.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I didn't really expect that, like, these days, you know. You know, you kind of think like, oh, like, people don't really say stuff like that anymore.
Oh, yeah, some people probably still do.
Mm.
Wow, that is really bad.
I mean, I think the whole assumption thing is really interesting, because there's so many, it can happen in so many different ways. But being, I don't know what to call me, first generation, second generation, second generation, I guess, Ghanaian, growing up in the UK, there's a lot of assumptions that people make about you in both settings. So there's all the assumptions here in England, but then there's assumptions in, like, if I go to Ghana, if I meet certain types of Ghanaians, they assume things all the time. Even now as an adult, I was talking to someone, and they were explaining something to me, and they said something very simple in my language. Like, they said, oh, someone said, the man said this, which means, I can't remember exactly what she said, but let's just say she said, oh, the man said, stand up. That means stand up in our language. And I was like, first of all, I understand. Second of all, you're assuming I don't understand, and I don't like that. Third of all, why are you assuming that I don't understand? Just because, do you know what I mean? And the worst thing, the thing that makes it, or like, the thing that makes it the worst is that they always assume the most simple thing. Like, if you're doing a whole lecture in my home language and you assume I don't understand, so you decide to translate for me, like, fair enough. But like, this is simple, like one verb type of thing. And you just assume that I don't understand. At least ask me first, like, oh, do you understand? Like, you know, but they just see you and they're like, oh, she grew up in London. That means she doesn't understand anything.
She needs an interpreter.
Yeah. It's so annoying. So
Yeah,
I'm sure there's loads of people that can kind of feel my pain in that regard. That's just like a silly one.
No, it's true though.
It happens so much.
It happens.
It happens so much.
I mean, like, I grew up in Nigeria, and sometimes when I go to Nigeria, that happens to me. There are people who are either like peddling to me, like, oh, you surely, like, you're not used to this, let's do that for you, or like, and I know they mean well, but it's like, no, I actually want to do it myself.
Yeah.
I want to experience this myself. And like, even sometimes I go to places, people are like, oh, if you so for example, if I go to the market, they're like, oh, if you talk, they're going to know you're not from here, so they're going to like charge you high. I was like, you don't know about me. It's just really interesting. I know they mean well, but it doesn't make it any less annoying.
But then that's another point though. It's from like those countries, or like from Ghana, in Nigeria, I know in Jamaica as well, there's that assumption of, because you're from England, you're rich. So then you can do this, you can do that, do you know what I mean? So therefore I should charge you higher because you're rich. But it's like, where's this assumption come from? Do you know what I mean? It's just
very true.
There's so many assumptions which go around, isn't there? It's so interesting.
And I think the bottom line is that we've all given examples of when people have like assume things about us and we don't like it. I mean, minus your very rude one, Anya, like obviously there's that one's horrible. But these are like, I guess, quote unquote, not the kind of silly little ones that people wouldn't really think that much about, but it's still really annoying. So just imagine that for somebody else, you know. And you know, you have to be aware of it, because you know what you said to me about, you know, the colleague or whoever that you assume didn't know what yam porridge was. I mean, I even did that to you, didn't I? Like that's one time we were talking about some food from Ghana and I was like, oh, you wouldn't know. You were like, who told you that I didn't know? I just assumed, I was like, oh, you know, it's just like some food from Ghana, like, yeah, you wouldn't know it. And you did. So it's just like, obviously we're being really like playful and funny about it now, but like even to that level, like just don't assume. Try not to. I think it's kind of hard not to assume at all. But try not to, and don't insist when I'm telling you something else, you know.
So on today's episode, we talked about the danger of a single story. So that's kind of knowing something, just one thing about a person, or even if it's passed down knowledge about them, and just running with it, not necessarily considering that person holistically, or just kind of getting to know them for yourself, because obviously everyone has different experiences of other people. And we also talked about it in light of us being clinicians, and when we do that, as well as when other people do it to us as well. All right then, until next time, bye.
Bye.